Heels in the Sand Island, Seychelles Archipelago, Earth. September 8th, 3114, 110 years before the arrival of the assemblage Ark. The message is, Father, please come to the Simulated Reality Project right away. A representative of the assemblage wishes to meet you. I sat in my seaward-facing, leather-covered Morris chair, sipping freshly brewed coffee. I was deep in thought, pondering the message which my longtime companion Omu had recently awakened me to deliver. The gist of the message was, Sol's system had recently received an interstellar transmission from our enemy, the assemblage. Included in that transmission was the mind data of an enemy operative. As planned, the enemy mind data had been downloaded into the SRP, short for the Simulated Reality Project. This was the virtual cage we had prepared for just such an eventuality. As I sat there in the dark room considering the matter, Omu waited nearby for my response. The android's very feminine-shaped frame was kneeling on her charging mat. Her posture was almost submissive, hands resting flat on upper thighs, back held rigid with her head slightly tilted downward. She typically waited in this position if it were just the two of us, only assuming a more natural human pose if there were others present. I'd stopped trying to get her to relax over a century ago, having long since realized that relaxation was just a human state of mind. As I thought, I gazed out the eastward-facing, circular wall of glass, studying the darkness beyond. I had disabled the low-light augmentation feature of my smart irises so I could watch the ending of night in its natural state. It was 5:34 in the morning local time, and true dawn was just 40 minutes away. My retreat's high cliff-top perch allowed an unobstructed view all the way out to the horizon. Nautical dawn had occurred 8 minutes ago, meaning I could now differentiate the water from the slightly brighter skies above. It was not a still scene, as there were movements in both the sky and the waters below. The sky motions were caused by the flashes and flarings of dozens of orbiting satellites and space stations catching the reflecting pre-dawn sunlight. Below that heavenly show, the lower ocean movements were caused by the slowly shifting red and green running lights from the automated ore freighters cruising by the archipelago approximately 30 kilometers to the northeast. I squinted suddenly as the dark tabloid was interrupted by the lights coming on in the adjacent kitchen unit. My houseguest, Adele Sol-Chilean, was awake. She had been staying with me for the past 2 days after she had finally convinced me to agree to be interviewed for her research. I had done so less to satisfy her curiosity, and more so because of grief, hate, and even a little shame. The grief and hate had been caused by the accidental deaths of my students at the Mogao Cave Complex in China 11 years ago. The shame had come more recently when just 2 years ago, Miss Chilean had been killed by neo-bears in Mongolia as she tried to study me from afar. I had been too self-absorbed and had ignored her plight, which had cost the young woman her life. After my return from living that nomadic lifestyle, and after a year for the world to recover from the notorious actions which I had precipitated at the Forbin complex afterwards, the reshelled Adele had reached out to me once again. She explained to me that even though she had lost 11 months of uniqueness, she had since made up for that and was still eager to learn my full story to better understand my actions. I had agreed to a virtual meeting and found her witty, charming, and intelligent. I told myself that it was for those reasons alone, and not also for the fact that she was also incredibly beautiful, with a young, not yet 20-year-old replacement shell. But as I said, I had agreed for her to come to Heels in the Sand and be my guest for a series of face-to-face interviews. The past few days had been rewarding for both of us. Adele finally began to get answers for her research, while I shared in her excitement and began to overcome my guilt and shame. She hadn't yet noticed me sitting in the darkness, and I remained still and silent, watching her move about the kitchen. Omu also remained silent, but did subtlety change her posture to appear more relaxed and human-like. Adele was preparing herself tea. Before she could attempt to carry the hot cup to the room's lounging area, I quietly spoke, "Good morning." As I expected, my greeting startled her. "Oh, good morning, Jon," she said after peering into the darkness to see who had spoken. "I thought I smelled coffee. You are up early this morning." She was still dealing with the time changes since arriving here a few days ago and had been going to bed and rising much earlier than I normally did. I watched her as she carefully carried her tea to the couch near my chair. She walked with the more mature patience of a person in their mid-30s. Her poise was subtly out of place with her late teenage replacement shell. She noticed the android as she took her seat. "Good morning to you also, Omu. I would comment on you being up early, but of course you're always up." Adele was wearing only a short silken robe that was loosely tied shut. I felt myself stir from the sight of her almost visible nipples and exposed muscular-toned thighs as she sat on folded legs. In this era of common nudity, partial nakedness was oftentimes more arousing. She noticed my casual inspection of her body and smiled demurely. I suspect she had had her new shell enhanced to increase its sex appeal. A woman of her age probably wanted a shell that projected she was sexually mature and active. I was currently dressed in only a pair of shorts, and her eyes also roamed over my shell in the dim light. We had slowly been dancing towards the same end of the ballroom over the past 2 days, and I fully expected us to eventually take our mutual seduction to its logical conclusion. There was no rush, and I wanted to get the bulk of the interviews done before moving our relationship onto more intimate grounds. Next, she did something that impressed me for someone her age. She instructed the kitchen lights to extinguish, and then, in the darkness, simply sat silently with me and watched the coming dawn. Soon, the slowly brightening panorama indicated that we had left the nautical dawn behind and entered civil dawn. This meant we were now able to distinguish the horizon much more clearly. The reflections from the satellites and space stations overhead dimmed against a background that grew increasingly pink. The running lights of the distant freighters blended into the brightening ocean, and the dark physical shapes of the enormous ships themselves were revealed. Behind us, if we had looked, we would have been able to easily make out the tops of the 2 prominent hills on the northern and southern ends of my island. Nearly 20 minutes later, the fiery orb of our sun shimmered above the horizon. It rose without an ultra-rare green flash, but the scene was still breathtaking. We continued watching the show until the sun was fully exposed. Finally, Adele set her empty teacup down and turned to me. "Are you up early because of the alert message yesterday?" She was referring to the system-wide message which Minervus, the AI in charge of the defense of Sol system, had sent to all humans regarding the reception of a high-bandwidth transmission from the assemblage. There would be a virtual global forum to discuss the transmission in 2 days. All of humanity would be welcome and encouraged to attend. As an honorary Tier 1 member, I was expected to attend along with the directors, although I held no actual rank. "Yes," I replied. "You've heard about the coming meeting?" She nodded. "Yes, I will be attending as a Tier 3 composite group participant." This meant that she would be in a group forum with others sharing her specialties, anthropology, and history. Their input could be directly queried from the lower tiers, and they could submit spontaneous questions and comments as a group. Tier 3 was a good standing for someone as young as Adele was, and she should be proud of the progress she had made since reaching base maturity. Although Tier 3 members could be ignored if deemed irrelevant by the AI moderator or the human directors, their input would still be given consideration and recorded into the record. And it was a clear step above the general population's Tier 4 and 5, who could only observe until the forum's conclusion when the floor was left open to all commentary. I made no mention of my prime tier status. Adele would already know of it, and I did not want to appear to be bragging. Instead, I shared with her a bit of news that was not currently widely known. In addition to the core message of the transmission, the assemblage transmitted a digital agent. This agent has been installed into the Simulated Reality project. One copy was installed into a near-parity iteration and is almost fully aware of the Earth's current situation. I have been invited to meet with this agent before the general meeting. The news made her sit up. Her wispy robe opened enough to now show the full swell of her breast. In her excitement at the news, she either ignored or was unaware of her provocative display. "Oh, Jon, that's amazing! I wish I could come along and observe," she stated, almost begging. I turned to the android. "Omu, I have just conferred with Dionys AI. It has no issue with Miss Chilean accompanying you into the near-parity iteration. Miss Chilean's shell is equipped with modern cranial implants, so there are no physical barriers preventing her attendance," the android said. "Omu, please call me Adele," the young woman said with a small pout. "Of course, Miss Chilean," Omu said, "although I prefer the use of first names for only the most intimate of John's friends and associates." I almost snorted as Adele wrinkled her nose and looked confused. I caught the android's attempt at jerking my guest chain. That, or maybe a hint of being a good wingman to me. "Well, hopefully I will join that group soon, Omu," she said with a smirk, her gaze now back on me. As she spoke, she also shifted her position on the couch, allowing her silken robe to fall open even further. The room was now bright enough that I could see her pale, perfect skin in the new shadowed areas now exposed. She winked as I rolled my eyes and shook my head. We used the medical creches in the basement to better connect our brains to the virtuality and send our mental selves off to the SRP. The creche's sensitive mind data transducers would allow for a higher resolution connection with less lag than if we used the lodge's general wireless connection. Low latency was much preferred, as signals would be passing to and from our brains via satellite relay to the various physical locations around the planet where the SRP's main data centers were located. I entered a creche first, allowing Adele time to back out if she wished. Omu helped attach the creche's data sensors onto various parts of my skull and then gave my shoulder a comforting squeeze when she finished. Seconds later, the view of the medical room faded out, and I found myself standing in a virtual reception room. The room was white crystal and ultra-modern, clearly not from the real world. I looked down and saw that my virtual self-image was not as I expected. Instead of my standard appearance, which was a very close duplicate of my current younger and physically fit shell, I was now in a virtual body which I had not seen for nearly 1,100 years. It was that of my slightly overweight, middle-aged, and formerly depressed self. The same one I had been living in before the alien attack had destroyed my world and killed all of humanity. "What the hell?" I blurted out loud. "Our guest has requested this change to your virtual appearance, Father." I spun around to see my daughter Kella standing behind me. Her appearance was much as it had been when Ux and I had visited her here nearly 2 years ago. This time, however, she had a slight smile and looked much happier than she had during that visit. As I had suspected, now that the simulated reality project finally had a purpose, she had started to feel alive again. I had also noted her emphasis on the word guest. "Our guest being the assemblage operative?" I asked. "Yes, Father. As you will see momentarily, there is a shared history between the two of you." She was interrupted by Adele popping into existence and joining us in the virtual reception room. I noted the young historian's virtual image looked different than her current physical shell. It was older and maybe a bit plainer than the replacement shell she wore currently. This virtual image must have been based upon her actual birth shell, which had been killed back in Mongolia in the Neo-Bear attack. I immediately sensed it fit her true personality better, and I suspect that was why she had not updated it. Adele looked around the reception room briefly before focusing on Kella and me. "Wow, the original John Abrams," she said as she studied my current appearance. She had said it with the excitement of a twitcher spotting a rare avian. I realized that, with me being the subject of her studies, she would have been intimately familiar with my background and pre-reset appearance. I shrugged. "Not my doing. My virtual image normally resembles the shell I was wearing back on my island. This image is at the request of our guest." She looked confused but kept any questions to herself for the moment. Instead, she turned to greet my daughter. I introduced them to one another. I could tell from Adele's interest that she had found another potential interview subject. Their conversation was interrupted by the fourth member of our party joining us. As had happened the last time I had seen her in virtual, Omu's digital appearance momentarily took my breath away. I could not help but roam my eyes up and down her alabaster skin perfection. The petite woman tolerated my inspection and simply smiled back at me, with her impossibly white perfect teeth showing through illuminated blue-painted lips. There was one obvious change in her virtual appearance since last time. This time she wore a tight-fitting body stocking of iridescent deep blue instead of the black she had worn normally. I was happy to see that this new outfit simply shimmered randomly without actively tracking the viewer's eye movements, as the last one did. I hoped this change would help make my leering less noticeable. "I love the outfit, Omu," I admitted out loud. She gave me a little twirl and my eyes were instinctively drawn to her cute backside. I quickly looked elsewhere, but not before my gaze had been caught by the others. Adele rolled her eyes and I thought I caught the hint of jealousy. I wondered if she would be shopping for a new virtual wardrobe in the near future. Kayla just smiled slightly. She had been living in virtual for too long, and I feared was numb to such matters as clothing and sex appeal. That, or she was simply ignoring her pervy dad's actions. "Hello, Omu, it's been a long time," she said as she approached the virtual android. "I've never seen you with a corporeal projection in virtual before." "Yes, Kayla, it has been quite some time. I have recently made changes to both my physical hardware and how I represent myself virtually. Change is needed to prevent stagnation." I noticed my daughter's slightly stiff reaction to Omu's statement. She'd caught the secondary barb embedded in the android's reply. Kayla had definitely been existing close to stagnation for much of the past century as she remained secluded here in virtual. Hopefully that would change now that the SRP was fully activated. I decided to change the subject. "So we are going to be meeting a copy of the enemy operative who has been loaded into a near parity iteration. I guess that means that it's fully aware of the actual situation here on the Earth, including our defeat of its master AI?" "Yes, Father," Kayla answered. "The mind data we will be interacting with was loaded into the iteration 9 hours ago. The iteration is currently operating at an accelerated rate of 50-1. From its perspective, it has been active for 2.5 weeks. During that time, it has had almost unlimited access to our full history and current situation." "Why was it allowed to learn so much?" I asked. "The simulated reality project was created to mislead any digital scouts. The near-parity iteration seemed to defeat that purpose. The thoughts and actions of this operative are to be used as a baseline comparison to the copies kept in other, fully fabricated alternate history iterations," she explained. "This required it to be aware of the truths of our world. Note that the events of past 2 years have still been kept from it for potential tactical reasons. I took this to mean that this copy had not yet learned of our recent actions at the Forbin complex or of Ux's discovery of wormhole technology. We would have to watch what we said to the operative." I said as much to Adele, but Kayla assured us we did not have to worry about a slip of the tongue with her next comment. "You do not have to be concerned with accidentally betraying any secrets or knowledge. Dionys AI can wipe and restore this digital operative to any point and knowledge level we wish after our visit," Kayla explained. "Also, once we enter the active iteration, if you wish to pause for any reason, simply say pause, subvocally. This will freeze the scene and the operative's virtual presence while we remain active. It will be unaware of our actions and discussions during that time." Kayla asked if we had any further questions, to which Adele and I indicated that we were ready. Omu must have responded digitally. Kayla became still for a moment, and we were inserted into the iteration. The white reception room faded, and what replaced it was a scene reminding me of an old, ancient dungeon. The floor was a damp, rough stone, as were the walls and vaulted ceilings. There were actual burning torches in sconces mounted on the walls to each side, which lit the chamber with a feeble, flickering light. The chamber also smelled of feces, vomit, and decay. I resisted the sudden urge to gag. What the hell? Adele, Omu, and Kayla had appeared with me. I looked at Kayla with a questioning look, but she just rolled her eyes at the room's conditions, as if it were some sort of joke. She pointed ahead to where there was a series of cells. Each had a crude gridwork of riveted, wrought iron bars closing them off from our area of the dungeon. The cell directly in front of us appeared to be the only one currently occupied. In the far corner, lying on a small pile of dirty straw, was a human-shaped figure dressed in rags. The pathetic-looking creature became aware of our presence and painfully rose to its feet and approached the iron bars. "Kayla, you've returned," the human figure said weakly. "I see you've brought me visitors." The poor human's voice sounded male and was also strangely familiar. As he limped into the torchlight, I realized I knew this person. It was someone from way back before the reset of 1100 years ago. "Pickett," I burst out. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Hello, Jon," the poor figure wheezed out. "It's been a long time. How do you like my new home?" Pickett asked, gesturing around his pathetic cell. "Pause!" I almost shouted subvocally. The wasted figure of Pickett immediately froze along with the flickering torch flames. I turned to my daughter. "All right, Kella. What the hell is going on here?" As I explained, Father, the enemy operative has been in this iteration for over 2 weeks from its perspective. In that time, it has had access to the data archives which the enemy master AI had compiled before its defeat almost 2 centuries ago. Those archives included all data on the previous enemy operatives and their activities on the Earth. It learned the history of the operative you knew as Pickett and its interactions with you back when you were neighbors in the years before the enemy attack. The operative also learned of your more current events, including your key role in the defeat of the Master AI, which thwarted the Assembly's plans for our world. The operative knows of your importance both historically and in the present. With that knowledge, it prepared for this meeting by altering its virtual appearance to match that of your former neighbor. It also created this ancient dungeon scenery as a setting for this meeting. It likely did both to nudge your emotional response towards feelings of sympathy, or possibly the dungeon setting was created simply for reasons of humor. "Do you wish to continue this meeting in a different setting?" she asked. "Yes, something more modern and less penal. Oh, and make it smell better," I added. After a few seconds, the frozen ancient dungeon scene faded away and was replaced by a much more inviting outdoor park-like setting. The operative's shabby, emaciated image was altered as well. It still looked like Pickett, but his appearance was much healthier and his clothing was modern and clean. The new setting became animated with the leaves on the trees moving in a gentle breeze. I was happy to note that it smelled of fresh flowers, lilacs. Pickett looked around at the new environment and, noticing his altered appearance, frowned. "Oh well, it was a foolish attempt to sway your emotions by appearing helpless and pathetic. I admit that this is a much more agreeable place to have a conversation." Now I frown. Was Pickett admitting to his attempted manipulation honestly, or was he simply trying another method to gain my trust and steer my emotions? I suspected the latter. One benefit of my having been active for over 2 centuries was that my bullshit detector was very finely honed. I'd have to consider everything that came out of his mouth with suspicion. "Hello, sir. How much of the old Pickett's memories and knowledge do you have to go along with his appearance?" I asked. "I contain the full mind data record from the Pickett you knew back then, John. When that operative completed his mission on the night our attacks began, he was mind scanned before his physical body was reduced to base elements. The mind data was compiled and stored in the Master AI's memory archives. The bulk of those archives survive to this day. Since my base mind data transmitted to your world closely matched his base state when he was sent here over 2,000 years ago, after merging with the archived data, I am for all intents and purposes now Pickett reborn," the new Pickett explained. "You mean Pickett did not survive after he and the other operatives had escaped to the orbital space station?" I asked. The new Pickett just smiled. "John, do you really think that the small launcher you observed leaving Pickett's barn on the night of the attack was large enough to convey his physical body all the way to either the main base in Mexico or the stealthed orbital station?" I had wondered about that. I remembered that the rocket I had witnessed shooting off that night had only been slightly bigger than a water heater. It had always bothered me, and now it appeared that my concern had been warranted. New Pickett continued. "Pickett was mind-scanned in the underground bunker just minutes after your last conversation where he implored you to take shelter in his dwelling. A summary of his mind data was immediately transmitted to the orbital station. A short while later, a complete copy of his mind data was uploaded into a physical memory unit, along with a backup of the local AI. These were sent to the stealth satellite by the small launcher you witnessed leaving his barn. When you had finally decided to seek shelter in his bunker, his physical body had already been reduced to its component elements in the underground bunker's reduction machinery," New Pickett explained. "But I spoke with Pickett later that night via video. He was in a spaceship with his fellow operatives." "I saw them," I exclaimed. New Pickett just smiled and gestured at the virtual park scene around us. Of course, it had all been a digital fabrication. I should have realized. While I recovered from that revelation, Adele spoke up. "Sir, why are you in this human form, and not presenting yourself in the true form of a member of the assemblage. New Pickett turned to her. Well, Miss Adele, sir. My name is Adele Chilean, my interviewer said, introducing herself. Well, Miss Adele, I am in this form because I was sent with no data of my original form, he answered. All operatives transmitted across space possess limited knowledge of our origins or of the technology and abilities of those who sent us. Obviously, this is because of the chances that our transmission might be intercepted by a possible foe. I noticed this version of Pickett seemed to have better manners and interactions compared to the one I knew from 1100 years ago. I wondered if that was because it had been sent with a deeper personality, or if it had forced itself to learn proper mannerisms after being installed into this virtual iteration. The enemy operative gave an inquiring glance towards Omu. My android friend remained silent and just returned Pickett's stare. I wondered why Omu refused to engage the agent, but played along for now. Adele seized the silence to begin asking a series of surprisingly good questions to the new Pickett. Most were beyond his current knowledge, but he was able to answer some or provide speculation on others. These were mainly related to the assemblage race and its history. One item, new Pickett, I guess I should just start thinking of him as Pickett, was able to confirm was that the assemblage arc would be passing through our solar system in 110 years. When Adele then asked why the operative had been sent to Earth at this point in time, his answer surprised me. I have become aware that you have recently detected that the assemblage arc has been attacked. I can confirm that this is so and that it has suffered extensive damage. I was sent here now because of this attack. My instructions were to mobilize this system to begin a massive rescue effort, with the goal of salvage and repair of the damaged arc, Pickett explained. Pause, I subvocalized. The park scenery and Pickett froze. Omo, is he telling the truth? I asked. Yes, John. As will be discussed during the planet-wide Conscientia Forum in just over 2 days, we have confirmed this is the main purpose for the recent transmissions sent to the Earth from the assemblage arc. Would you like a summary now, or wait to learn the full details during that meeting? Adele and I both asked for the details now. I will break down the imperatives included in the transmission succinctly, the android replied. First, all ongoing work in this system preparing assemblage living habitats and mine data download facilities is to be suspended. Both are no longer needed, as the damage the Ark received from the Hemru attack has severely limited its ability to transmit mass quantities of mine data. Earth will no longer be receiving an assemblage mass migration. Adele and I both looked startled upon hearing that. That was great news. Omu paused a moment to allow us to recover. I noted that Kayla stood calmly. She must have already learned these details from her interactions and observations of the various active versions of the enemy operative. Second, a larger system-wide construction project is to begin. The goal of this project is to construct and launch a second interstellar arc. This new arc is to be completed, provisioned, and launched in time to rendezvous with the current damaged arc as it passes by our solar system. During rendezvous, the new arc will transfer repair materials and energies to the existing arc to allow it to be made fully functional again to continue on its mission. After offloading the material and energy, the new arc will then receive a complete copy of all archived assemblage species mine data from the original. They will then separate and proceed along diverging vectors, with both the new and old arc's courses being altered enough to allow them to remain safe from any further attacks from the Hemru, who are aware of the current arc's heading and speed. Wow, I thought about what I just heard. The Hemru attack had done some serious damage to the enemy arc, but not enough to disable it completely. Now it needed Sol's system to help it recover. If that happened, it sounded like the assemblage would end up better off than before, with not one but two arcs spreading its members across even more of the galaxy. With the assemblage growing further and further away from the Hemru, it was up to humanity to ensure that this did not happen. I could not imagine cooperating with the assemblage, but I still wondered about these new directives. From what I understood, building the original arc had practically wrecked the assemblage homeworld. Do we even have the resources to build and launch a new arc in time? I asked the android. Yes, but just barely. The AI Advisory Council has run numerous simulations. The effort is many orders of magnitude greater than that expended currently to create humanity's interstellar colonizer vessels such as Gambato and also the crash research efforts to develop wormhole technology. It can be done, but the effort would likely result in the destruction of the Earth's biosphere due to the massive amounts of mining, manufacturing, and energy production needed. Omu went on, the production of the required amounts of antimatter alone would require the current resources of the entire system. Not only would sufficient quantities be needed to accelerate a new arc to match the current 7.496% of light speed of the existing assemblage arc, but additional amounts would be required to repair the damaged arc and to provide course correction energies for both arcs after they separate. After the android's summary, we resumed the pause session with Pickett. I caught the blur as my virtual self was reset back to the position I had been in before Pickett was paused. Despite these adjustments, Pickett frowned. He had noticed the pause and was likely aware of our conversing without him. Pickett, now that you've learned that humanity has taken back control of this system from your master AI, you can't really expect us to drop everything and cooperate to build a second arc, can you? Pickett paused a moment before answering. Yes, it is now unlikely that you will help us, Jon. Despite the actual situation here on your world, I would hope that in the interest of the ongoing safety and preservation of your species, that you will still choose to do so. What do you mean? I asked, confused. 2 reasons, Jon. The first is that once the assemblage passes your system, your world will be free of it for all time. It will only pass harmlessly by if it remains convinced that you pose no threat. Building and launching a rescue arc would demonstrate that intent perfectly. If humanity chooses to not build the second arc, then the assemblage will likely consider this system hostile and take action against you as it approaches. As I thought about that response, I had to admit it was plausible. With the enemy's transmission commanding Earth to stop constructing habitats, we no longer had to continue preparing that ruse. It would be monitoring the system for signs that its new rescue project had begun. The second arc, assuming it was constructed, would need to launch well before the first arrived. This meant that the new arc's massive engines would be pointing towards the approaching arc, and their firing should be easily detectable. If the launch did not occur and no detection made, the assemblage would know that it had lost control of the system. Pickett continued, the second reason is that humanity must obviously join forces with the assemblage against our common enemy, the Hemru. They have clearly demonstrated their belligerence and proven to be dangerous even across interstellar distances. They will move against your world as they have already moved against the assemblage arc. They will have no other choice. Part of this response is a falsehood. Jon, I heard in my mind. Omu had sent this new message. I noted it felt just like the implant communications my real shell was capable of. Pause, I said subvocally. When the scene froze again, I said to the android, please explain, Omu. Kella and Adele turned to Omu also. They must have received the android's private mental message, as well as they made no inquiries about the pause. The previous statement by the Pickett operative has inconsistencies, Jon. It remains unsure as to the true disposition of the Hemru species towards humanity. It knows the Hemru rogue agents were behind your success here against its master AI, but is unsure of any communications between humanity and the Hemru since then. I believe its statement about the Hemru threat existing against humanity is both a bluff and an attempt to troll for further information. Interesting. Adele asked a few follow-on questions about how Omu had arrived at that conclusion. The main reasons were that the data existing in the new Pickett's mind had been almost completely analyzed, and that Dionys was running an active comparison against the other versions of this Pickett operative currently active in other iterations. Some of those iterations were augmented with wide-ranging hypothetical scenarios. One scenario included increased active Hemru support arriving on Earth before the arrival of the Ark. In that iteration, the barely in control Master AI and the new Pickett operatives were actively battling Hemru augmented human resistance forces. Omu was basing her understanding of Pickett's true motives and beliefs by comparing this version with all the other active versions. A true image of the enemy's knowledge of the Hemru was forming. It was like being questioned in a holding cell and having your answers compared to those of dozens of copies in other holding cells. Trying to maintain a consistent story would be pointless. We resumed the virtual session with Pickett. Pickett, You know that the Hemru are the reason humanity overthrew your puppet master AI here in the solar system? How can you claim that they pose a threat to us after we've already received their help? I asked. Simple, John. They are too distant to know that humanity continues to rule here. Our Ark has intercepted no messages sent from your world to theirs informing them of that. You have wisely tried to suppress the knowledge of your activities from us. This also limits your ability to converse freely with the Hemru. They will have to be suspicious of your silence. The Hemru are therefore required to assume that the agents they sent 1,600 years ago had failed. They will logically conclude that your planet is still firmly under assemblage control. Your ongoing ruse of constructing assemblage, habitats, and mine data receiving infrastructure would also foster those Hemru suspicions. Also, considering the fact that the attack on our Ark was launched from Hemru space, possibly as long as a millennia ago, in order to catch our departing Ark, it is logical that additional attacks targeted on this world may have already long since been launched, Pickett explained. Adele, Kayla, and I digested that soberly. Omu remained silent. I turned to the android and raised my eyebrows slightly. The operative's assumptions are logical, John. I heard via my virtual implant. I turned back to Pickett. So you want us to throw in with the assemblage because we have no other choice? That is correct. If you do nothing, the assemblage will become aware that you are no longer under their control. A suppression attack will be launched before they arrive, hoping to damage the system enough to ensure their safe passage. Their high velocity approaching your system both protects them and increases your vulnerability. You and your AIs have already concluded this. In addition, the Hemru will continue to assume that your world remains firmly under our control. Logically, if they had launched an attack on your world long ago, it will have been time to arrive here just before or during our passage in an attempt to interrupt the transmission of our mind data to your planet. Even if you were now to transmit news of your overthrow of our control to the Hemru, it would not arrive at their world in time for them to stop such an already launched attack. So you see, John, your only real choice is to aid us. This will both forestall the assemblage Ark's preemptive attack triggered by your inaction and also ensure that humanity survives the likely coming attack or attacks from the Hemru, he explained. How so? I replied, curious. Why, the rescue Ark you construct and launch from your system will also carry along with it all the mind data of every human being currently living John. Humanity will thus escape the coming Hemru attacks, and better yet, once the two Arks rendezvous, the mind data contained on both will be merged. Humanity will join the assemblage in populating countless future star systems, and your long-term survival will be assured. I was too stunned to pause the session. Pickett was intending that humans would become like the assemblage and spread themselves across the galaxy. Why would they allow humans to join them? I asked. Why would they not, John? Humans are not so different from the assemblage. You have proven to be highly adaptable both to digital mind data transfer and to genetic engineering. As digital freight, your population will be suspended just like that of the assemblage. Once downloaded onto new worlds, all will be integrated into new bioforms, so there will be no real differences between either species, he explained. No one spoke for a moment as the humans absorbed that revelation. It was telling that Omu did not say anything via implant. What Pickett was saying must have been a possibility. Pickett continued, so, humanity can either do nothing and face the attacks from both the assemblage and the Hemru, or it can join us and escape, spreading itself among the stars. I suppose a third choice would be that some of you could escape by fleeing the system on your own. You have time to finish your current interstellar range vessel and possibly construct one or two more before any attacks arrive. I looked directly at the alien operative. Or we could go down fighting, shift all of our efforts into building an attack force and sending it off to destroy your Ark. We would remove that threat, and maybe we'd survive the Hemru attack. If not, maybe our solar system could be recolonized by the humans we have already sent off to other systems or whom we have stored away in the far reaches of this one. Pickett stared back at me. He did not argue the point, nor did it seem particularly worried. Finally, he spoke. That remains an option for you, John. I am sure your AIs have already calculated the chances of success. Those chances must be very low, almost suicidally low. He simply continued to stare at me after he was finished. I managed to control myself and not reply. I wondered if Pickett's mention of suicide had a deeper meaning. If so, he was very clever indeed. After another long moment of silence, Adele began asking further questions regarding Pickett's claims and statements. He was able to add details that reinforced his reasoning. I just stood there listening and thinking. I had to admit he had me in turmoil.